Shrishti, let me invite you to introduce our panelist.
Thanks so much, Prakash. So for this panel, we have a very interesting debate which concerns India and to understand behavioral science in India, the academic side as well as the applied side. So on this panel, we have Professor Ritwik Banerjee, writer and professor at IIM Bangalore, whose research is at the intersection of behavioral and development economics. He works His works include investigating corruption, inequality, education, and discrimination. He has also served as a consultant at the World Bank and is a visiting scholar at the Harvard University for the economics department. Next, we have Dr. Madhavi Rangaswamy. She is an associate professor of psychology at Christ University, Bangalore. She received her PhD from the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. Her research expertise includes approach to study cognition. She has training in multimodal techniques like eye tracking and fMRI. Her current work aims to understand cognitive and affected correlates of risky behavior in adolescents and young adults. With them today, we have Jeevant Rampal, Associate Professor at IIM Ahmedabad, with a focus on economic theory and behavioral/experimental economics, if you will have it. He won the Decision Sciences Collaborative Best Research Award at the Ohio State University, as well as a Departmental Citation for Excellence in Teaching Award at the Ohio State University. We're very happy to have you with us, Professor. Next, we have, again, a very dynamic personality from the academic side, Sujoy Chakravarty. He received his PhD in economics from Purdue University. He has since then been a faculty member with various globally acclaimed institutions like the University of Texas, Dallas, Indian Institute of Management, IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, and the Jawaharlal University, where he is currently a professor of economics. His research and teaching interests include microeconomics and experimental and behavioral economics. His research has been published in journals such as Ecological Economics, Review of Industrial Organization, and many, many more. And moderating this panel with us is Junofy, a lecturer and researcher at the University of Zurich and founder of the India Behavioral Economics Network, which I'm sure a lot of us in India who are interested in behavioral economics are a part of. She has independently worked and researched in economics for 9 years, published 2 books, and written over 35 research papers. Her projects range from intercaste discrimination and electoral gift giving in India to the immigration perception in Switzerland. So enough with the introductions. All of us are so excited to hear from you guys. So take it away.
Thank you, Shrishti, for the intro. Because we have all been introduced already, I thought let's just start with a quick round of questions. So it's always interesting to know how you guys got into behavioral science. So maybe you could just tell us what the tipping point was in behavioral economics or science in general. Let's start with Ritwik.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. So I went to do my PhD in economics from Aarhus University in Denmark, and my research proposal there was something to do with the Danish welfare state. So one day, when early in the morning, when I was heading out to office, it suddenly struck me that what would I do with a specialization in the Danish welfare state when I'm back in India? Nobody will ever give me a job, right? Around the same time, one of my former colleague, Tushi Baul, reached out to me with a very interesting proposal to study corruption with lab-based experiments. Now that sounded very interesting because the topic was something I could immediately connect to, and the method was something that I could not connect to. However, with a little bit of reading, I realized that there could be some interesting potential in what Tushi was reaching out to me for. So that's my foray into experiments. I've never been taught behavioral economics formally as a subject. I've picked up all that I had to along the way, and now, of course, I do teach.
How about you, Jeevant?
So this was very early doors. I had just learned about this concept of backward induction in my master's program. And the first thing I realized was this is not obvious or easy at all for normal people. And then I checked with my teacher in Delhi School of Economics if somebody had done some work on how people would normally just struggle with this concept. And he said, well, there's not much out there. And so I just started, that's how I just started doing research in trying to model people who have trouble with decisions that are in multi-stage scenarios where you have to look ahead. Of course, in standard economics, you're supposed to do it flawlessly. Everybody is supposed to be able to do it with no problems at all. But if you are going to be, so I just wanted to take that a little seriously. And so that became my entry into behavioral economics. And then, of course, in Ohio State, which is, I guess, why they took me, because I was already working on this kind of thing. There was a fantastic behavioral experimental department. And so just continued my journey there. Worked with Abhijit on some field experiments in using behavioral economics techniques for solving some malnutrition related problems in Maharashtra. So it's been, that's how I started, and it's been a continuing journey.
Sounds good. How about you, Sujoy? You're muted, Sujoy.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, lovely to be here at short notice, but at least I didn't have to prepare a PowerPoint and studying that. But thanks, guys, the organizers. But so I'm a little older than these two. So I got into it in the 90s, actually, out of just pure boredom with trying to do economic theory. So I was at Purdue University, where everybody did game theory or econometrics, and then a couple of people had come to the department, Tim Kaysen and Charles Lusser, who I found more interesting because they were actually talking about human decisions, and their whole thing at that point was, oh, it doesn't work. Economic theory doesn't work, and there's all these anomalies, and people don't, things like that. So that got me a little more interested. So so I started doing this completely heedlessly, like there was nothing out there, and I was writing some experimental instructions, but there's so little material out there. It was treated as so incredulously by the other colleagues of my advisor, who found this stuff to be completely bogus, and they were like, just do some theory, do some econometrics, they were like that. So it got to the point where I think I took a course in social psychology, the PhD students at Purdue, and that's when I realized that there's a whole world out there, of like human behavior, which goes way beyond like, economic variables or even fungible things you can translate into economic variables. There's things like sense of control and things like that. I mean, these things are alien to me, in my mid-20s. And, over time, though, when I came back to econ, they would be like, no, we don't do those kinds of experiments. We do like experiments like what Jeevant talked about, backward induction. So that kind of got me into it. But my first 10 years was very confusing because there was a lot of resistance, both in the West and in India, about experimentalists. Like we had the least jobs on the market. But I guess the stuff is interesting. I think if the content is interesting, over time you find ways to adapt to kind of make it work for you to whatever degree it works. So that's how I got into it, purely from doing theory and getting bored and wanting to do something else.
Sounds good. How about you, Madhavi? Sorry, you're muted as well.
It was really interesting to listen to everyone, and I guess I share the time frame with Sujoy more likely because my work in neuroscience started in the 90s. And unlike all of them, my whole subject was about studying behavior. I started with animals. I was looking at animals. So I'm a zoologist, a biologist by training. And from there to humans, there's been a sort of a interesting jump because when you deal with behavior in animals, there is much you can control, and there is a lot that you can sort of, hold constant, and perhaps, vary just few small things and see what is the effect. Now, having that enormous degree of control was fine, but always I was puzzled by, okay, now can I say just because a rat can do this, a human also will do it the same way? That doubt always is there. So, and most research, I think, certainly in the psychological sphere, is driven by a sort of a questioning of self in a way. So it only seemed natural to move into the human domain. But when I started work in the human domain, which was more from a neurophysiological perspective, looking at how the brain does what it does, right? And to a large extent, you don't look at behavior so much in detail. You go with what the brain is doing. To know that you don't have so much control, there is so much of theorizing that is to be done. That sort of, mismatch that would happen when you're trying to extrapolate what you find. That is what intrigued me, and that's what has kept me in this field. And I mean, all of our other panelists have encountered this. They all talk about their non-Indian experiences of encountering something while they study. And this is something why one of the important reasons that I came back to India was that I wasn't the sort of interdisciplinarity that I've experienced was something I did not find in the Indian space. And that was something we wanted to sort of, bring it into fruition. And certainly that's why I'm an educator in the field. So that's sort of like my entire journey in a nutshell. And I'm studying behavior and behavioral science and trying to do it in a different way. And I'm someone who doesn't belong in a traditional psychology department, but I do belong in a psychology department, and we are trying to bring back experimental psychology in a certain way. So that's been my journey so far. Thank you.
Sounds good. I mean, the most interesting thing here is that like we all have a long story of how we got into it, and it's not a very simple story. You know, if I ask most of my friends who do physics or mathematics how they got into it, it's like really simple because it was like right in front of their eyes and they just had to pick it. But this was like a very intentional search on all of our paths. And you know, you talk about 90s, and I was born in the 90s, so it did not get any easier now. Even I had to search for it, you know. It's always been a very active search for it, and that's just really sad. And the best part about this panel is that we all went through the process of looking for behavioral science and finding it, and like everyone here has that motivation to bring it back to India, and that's what makes this really amazing. Thank you guys for doing this. Okay, so before moving on to the questions, I thought I'd start with a small story that happened to me. So a few years ago, when I wanted to conduct a lab experiment in India, I contacted like some 25, 30 universities, and I was turned down by everyone for running the experiment in the university for so many different reasons. And just using the word experimental economics or an economic making study, none of it worked. So I had to finally frame it as a survey, which I'm just going to conduct with the students, which is when I finally got the green light from the university to conduct it. And one of them agreed to do that. So that was my sample. So we all know that this struggle has been like real, and it's just that nobody really knows about this topic in most of the universities, and even economics professors often do not even acknowledge that this field exists, right? Especially in India. So I thought we could start with all of you telling us what you think the current state of behavioral science is in India, especially in academia. How about this time we start with you, Jeevant?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's improving fast, right? I mean, we have Sujoy in JNU, Ritwik in Bangalore. We have so many people in Ashoka University, Shiv Nadar. You know, I know people now in more and more departments are getting people who do behavioral experimental economics. And so I think it's improving very fast. It's also going hand in hand with policymakers taking it seriously. with nudge units even for taxation. I have a colleague who works there. And again, World Bank with Ritwik working with them, and I also work with an ancillary organization. Overall, I think it's improving very quickly. Although conducting experiments is still hard. So maybe we can, as taking forward, we could have a system where say clearance within one department is honored by other departments as well. Because one challenge I had when trying to run experiments early doors was in India. Students would make deals before they came to the experiment. Like they would make profit sharing deals even before they knew what the experiment was. So you need like a large diversified sample to sort of guard against that. And for that, I think if there's more cooperation across departments, which is fast, growing very fast, I think the road ahead looks pretty promising to me. So that would be my take on it.
That's true. Things are sort of picking up, but although just in few universities and institutions, right? Just the top tier ones sort of at the moment. What do you think, Ritwik?
So if I were to talk about the method of experiment, I think behavioral economics is much widely accepted now, and behavioral science and behavioral economics in particular at the moment is extremely mainstream in economics. So even people who do auction theory, they are looking at various kinds of non-standard preferences, valuations, etc., etc. So behavioral economics is very much mainstream. I don't think people even think about behavioral economics as something hatke or something unorthodox, right? So I don't think so anymore, not anymore. But experiment as a method to collect data, as you pointed out, is still challenging. I mean, though almost all of us here do lab experiments, but I would also like to, point out that you could think about field experiments as well, where the participants, they are not aware that they are participating in a research study. So I have found it extremely hard to conduct field experiments. I have done a little bit of it. So Sujoy can talk more about lab experiments, but I can tell you about my experiences with field experiments. Field experiments, because they are conducted in an environment where participants are not aware, it's much easier to connect to a labor economist, let's say, who works with observational data with field experiments than with lab experiments. Lab experiments always sounds to non-experimentalists as an artifact, as an artificial construct. And who cares about what happens in the lab? But a labor economist or a health economist or a development economist will take you much more seriously if you can show evidence of what you have to say from field experiments. So conducting field experiments is extremely important, right? And particularly if you want to talk to development economists. However, I've found it extremely hard to conduct field experiments. So the most important reason being funding. You need a lot of money to conduct a field experiment, and I am Bangalore, which is reasonably well resourced. However, I don't think I can manage the kind of funding which is needed for a top tier field experiment. So that's one challenge which I can clearly see. The second is, I've had issues with the IRB. So if you look at the papers, the field experiment papers, which are being published in top journals in economics, let's say the protest paper or the women's labor supply paper in Saudi Arabia. So, in order to be able to target some of these top journals, it's extremely important to be to really think out of the box. And the moment you think out of the box in the context of experiments,
Please continue your life.
Sorry, guys, we got cut off. So yeah, Ritwik, you can continue now.
Yeah, so I mean, I have had issues with the IRB, and one reason is because the kind of experiments which are being done all over the world today, I don't think we in India, we have the exposure to appreciate the ethical concerns of the or the subtler aspects of conducting of designing experiments the way it is there in the West. So the moment you start thinking out of the box, there is that second concern as well. So I'll rest my case there with these two primary concerns. One being, exposure to modern experimental techniques and paradigms. The second being resources to conduct field-based experimental studies.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ritwik. I think we'll continue with Sujoy because I'm pretty sure Sujoy has a lot to say about the ethical concerns part and about lab experiments. So yeah, over to you, Sujoy.
Yeah, so I am, so I think the biggest problem that I have faced, at least, and I think a lot of college teachers, not with the IIMs, because I've also taught for a little bit at an IIM, but I've mostly been in India now at JNU, is the funding situation is awful. I mean, I have had to spend all my ingenuity. I mean, guys at ISI, like people like Priyo and Som have really helped me by working with me and diverting some funds from their own projects. But it is very, very difficult. And as some of you know, that things have not been very good in JNU and very destabilized for the last 3 or 4 years. So that's further completely chopped it all up. So it's made my current projects, I mean, except to do unpaid experiments or, the 1 or 2 things I have going, it is very difficult for me to discretionarily get money to work. And that has been a big stumbling block. And I was also at an IIM at a time when this was not taken that seriously, all this behavioral experimental, unlike Jeevant, who actually was, would have been my colleague if I had continued there today. But I think things are a lot better today, like 10, 12 years down the line, 15, more like 15 years down the line. So that's I feel the biggest problem. The other huge problem, I think, is just to not have people to bounce ideas with. And this is a big issue. Like I'm doing a paper now with all these ideas of neighborhood effects, people who live in towns of unemployed and areas of unemployment. We also tend to show lower productivity. These kinds of neighborhood effects, people who live in caste vigilante areas also show much stronger caste adherence. This is in connection with a paper I'm working on, but it's true. I mean, in India, at least, maybe in IIMs now and a few other institutions, IITs for the technology and science people, there is a certain day-to-day engagement with it. There's seminars, people are talking, there's stuff going on, there's internal funding available for you to do some stuff. To get it to the point, you can apply for foreign funding, etc. But unfortunately, in JNU, there is I love JNU very much. I mean, I have no intention of leaving it. It's a great university, but the research environment is not strong in the sense that there is a culture, there is no culture of this kind of deadline research where, I mean, insofar as research means intellectualism, which I appreciate deeply, so I'm not even dissing it. I think, dissent, democracy, culture, social justice, all of that is there. And these are to be appreciated. But I think the kind of research like, you'd understand as Ritwik is talking about in the West or Jeevant is talking, where people get together to work on things and then there's a deadline and then out comes a paper, with some results which are disseminated to your colleagues and you get feedback based on it. And one reason I found it very hard to, I think, especially in the earlier years, those first 10, 12 years, to even publish papers in good journals from India is I have no idea how good the paper is. I send it to somebody and by the time they respond to it, it's like 6 months, there's no day-to-day feedback. And I think I have, highly cited papers in really low-grade journals. And one reason for that is because I think, some of these are, I didn't know even how to pose it and how to write it, in some sense. So I think these are this kind of neighborhood effect that afflicts us. I think the IIM guys are a little better, and I'm very glad for them.
Sure, just what you're pointing out is probably true for for subjects beyond behavior and experiments, right?
Yeah, true. I am. And I think that's another big problem. So, and that's related to Ritwik's idea of that we are not at the frontier, hence. Because, when you don't have feedback of people working at a certain level and keeping updated. So, I mean, and updating each other through the social network. When you don't have stuff like that and you're working in isolation, I mean, I know some brilliant scholars in India who I think just were not, and not just in experimental behavioral economics, who just aren't disseminated enough, not because they don't have great ideas, they have great ideas, but because they did not know the right way to pose it. And I'm not saying everything should be up for sale, It's not like, hey, I have a great idea. Unless I market it using some multidimensional marketing model, it doesn't count. I'm not making such, brainless claims like that. So it's like, what I'm trying to say is that I think there is some sweet spot between getting an amazing idea, doing an amazing thing, and then being able to also present it in a way where you can disseminate it. And I think that wherewithal is low for someone like me, so I can think of great ideas. I mean, I'm trying to work on it, my newer projects with some of my students and all that, they're going someplace because I'm now trying to put in that quality control. But it doesn't come naturally in a way it comes to people at, better departments. And then, of course, the attitude towards these guys have felt less, and I may have felt more because I started my career trying to do all this in the early 2000s. So that attitude about, come on, firstly, there is a set of people in India, I feel, and this is across disciplines, who feel that doing these kinds of human experiments is sort of degrading the whole process. What the hell, man? What are you doing with these people? How can it be about the big ideas in economics? Like, I once went for a grant for the ESA conference to get money from JNU, and the dean, whose name I will not mention now, told me, like, what is this experimental economics? It's like taking an inquisition. Like, I'm a faculty, I've gone, hey, I've got accepted at a conference, can I apply for this funding within the university? And he's like, how does this answer the big questions of economics? What is this? And I'm like, shall I tell you? Because I can tell you, but it'll take a long time, and maybe you don't want to hear me, like that. But yeah, I didn't get that funding. So, I mean, it's always been very contested from that standpoint. Okay, so I'll stop now. I can go on and rant. I'll stop.
Well, if there's someone with a lot of money watching this, then fund behavioral science experiment.
I think we're all open for, crowdfunding, I mean, bring it on.
Yeah, actually, that you made like a lot of good points, and I think as someone from Indian Behavioral Economics Network, there are like some things that we could actually do. And I was just thinking, we could have monthly seminars where people from all over India can just meet like this and discuss ideas, or someone can have a pre-publication seminar or something like that as well.
But if I can interject for just 10 seconds more, I think the problem with such seminars is, and you can have them, and
Yes,
that there is no tail on fire, construct. People in the West are not doing fun seminars and reading clubs, they're actually collaborating with each other and doing these seminars in order to improve the quality. I know that may be a production approach, and some of my colleagues in JNU will be like, what kind of academics is this? You're supposed to, wander in the flowered fields of academics. It's not supposed to be this deadline driven. But I think to some extent, good ideas come out of that tail on your, on fire construct, and I suspect that, this tendency of, thinking about everything, where there's a default tendency in Indian academia to do, is also doesn't really help on one side. I don't want to cut that out and make it all programmatic and reductionist. That's going to that end of the spectrum is bad. But I think the other end of the spectrum, I see this around me in JNU, is the moment you narrow it down, how can you quantify that? I'm not saying that's an approach I'm taking. It doesn't mean that I think everybody thinks in digits and numbers, but like, how can you quantify feelings and emotions? How can you come on, man. I mean, I'm not quantifying them. I'm just classifying them in a way to study them a little better, Anyway.
What you probably need is like those Vegas weddings, right? So you just need to find collaborators and jump in with an idea. Okay. And then the synergy happens. Somewhere along the line, it will happen and it will grow.
Okay, that's a great analogy, a Vegas wedding. I mean,
I don't know why it popped into my mind. No, well, sorry. Can I continue?
Just proceed, of course.
Yeah. So why I'm saying this is precisely when I moved back to India, my one thing I resolved, I said, okay, I'm going back. I will teach. No more research for me. Research is over because certainly the India I left did not seem to have the climate for the sort of research that I cut my teeth on in the US. And this is not happening. And I was part of a multi-university consortium. So we were dealing with big data and the precision with which everybody would work and, interact and be supportive even. It wasn't like people weren't cutting you down. I didn't think that would be possible. And I didn't feel like we had evolved. So a lot of points, what the others have made has been my experience coming back. Certainly this notion of ethics is something new. And of course, one field which has gotten stabilized around it and understands this well is the medical research. So if we borrow, we should borrow from the lessons from how all those things came into being, because when I did research in a medical field, there was no such thing in my time when I got my PhD. This is new. So there was some time that was there, that had to be spent in getting that idea across, having people socialized into these kind of processes. And now medical research seems to be on a stable platform on that front. So, and the other thing, what I find is social psychology research in India has no standing. I'm talking purely from a psychology department perspective. It is very poor. It's primarily the domain of sociology departments to look at society's issues, but social psychology or social neuroscience even doesn't even exist. Now, if that had a sort of a good research existence, then it would have been automatic to have spilled over into behavioral economics, right? So it would have been a perfect synergy that would have emerged. Now, I feel like to some extent, this is from my perspective, is that we are not getting enough inputs and enough growth within psychology departments across universities to actually focus on these matters and to learn to collaborate. They tend to, we have this frog in the well approach, almost, or rather, academic in an ivory tower sounds more flattering, but it's more a frog in the well. So you are just happy with your little environment because outside that is a whole lot of mess. No one understands you. You don't know which journal to send it to. So you're very happy presenting in conferences with your own little pool of people. And with this, we don't have cross fertilization that could happen. And maybe that was the reason why I think we started an MOU with IAM. I think Ritwik is part of it. We began, although it didn't catch fire. I'm sure Ritwik will also agree with this. We are hoping to get this, it was a discussion forum. We actually started with a discussion forum. So there is, and what we found in that discussion forum was that each side speaks differently about this, and we were not clearly understanding. So we didn't understand I'm saying from the perspective of psychologists, we didn't understand the economists, and the behavioral economists didn't quite get our need for looking at an individual and our great pressure at, holding different things constant and stuff like that experimental rigor that we are interested in. So it's important to evolve a common language to then build this synergy. So that's why I made this comment about the Vegas wedding, because I really feel I'm very uncomfortable and uneasy in this space. I know nothing about economics. I know nothing about those big theories. I teach cognitive psych, so I do teach about decision making, and that's my entry into this space, right? But I'm ready to make a move and say, okay, let's see how this works, right? So thanks to the IAM folks, we've started using Z3. We actually set up small experiments, so like using these standard games, right? Your ultimatum and all that. And we introduced it as a syllabus, as something that they do in the practicals at the UG level. So those students responded very well to this. So I feel like as an educator, I think, I mean, of course, now we are concerned about our research, whether we are getting the synergy or not. It takes a little while for an old dog to learn new tricks. But if we make the new dogs getting a taste of the tricks now, I think maybe 10 years from now, we'll be in a much better place. And that's really happening now in India. So certainly, I think the field is emerging where there is an interdisciplinary kind of a dialogue. But from my side, I feel like, more people with social psychology inclinations should actually get into the experimental mode. They are still in the theory mode. So funding, yes. I find that we are mimicking certain things in the West, but we are not capturing the same thing. That if you give funding, the funding must not get interrupted in between. A lot of things need to be stable. People who are giving you funding need to have some experience in that field to understand, sort of like the NIH program managers who understand the people they've funded within their portfolios. So I think we have a lot of reform really required in the funding space. So it helps to probably this crowdfunding aspect or institutions getting together and sort of starting off some competition with a small pot of fund. Those sort of things would probably really help the situation. But I agree with everyone. Funding is a big problem. And IRBs, what Ritwik raised, IRB is a new idea, and members on the IRB also need to actually rise up to the situation a little bit. And this whole thing about compensating a participant is seen in such a bad light when it comes to medical research, because everyone is thinking of the Tuskegee trials and all those kind of things, your Stanford prison experiment, all those kind of things, right? So the bad examples of ethics is what is riding high. But the importance is to understand in what context. I mean, how do we define harm and what is harm? That is something we need to understand and be and allow. But this problem is world over, because in the US, my experience was we wanted to collect data from 8-year-olds, 8 to 16. Our IRB refused to let us collect from the 16-year-olds, said that they had no sense of agency. Whereas in San Diego, the IRB allowed them to collect from a 16-year-old. So that difference is going to be there, but we need to come up a little more and sort of iron out these differences if research has to really flower.
So relatively,
I'll just stop there.
I was told that, you economists, you corrupt your subjects by paying money. Now, I had to get a letter from an editor of experimental economics who substantiated that without monetary incentives, a paper would be desk rejected. Only then the IRB here, who had people from different disciplines, they agreed to allow me to use monetary compensation for participating in experiment as an exception.
Yes.
And strongly encouraged me not to follow such debatable and morally debatable research protocols. So these are the challenges, and and what is needed really is exactly what Madhavi said, to think out of the well. People are in a well, but it's important to sort of realize that there are these plural ways of looking at things.
I think as frogs from other wells come, which is what's happening, we can get together and change this. I agree there's a serious problem of, there's a trust deficit basically of this process. I had a similar experience in Ahmedabad trying to recruit subjects outside of IMA. They thought I was somebody from like Pepsi or Coke trying to, introduce some product or something. I mean, the gap between what I was trying to do and what they thought I was going to do was, immense. So I think over time, as more of us sort of seep into these organizations, hopefully, we can, and with more dialogue with our colleagues, we can change this. And also, as this gains more and more traction in popular media and social policy, hopefully, I'm hoping that it will change. And this right here is a good initiative.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
the point
the
of
thing
question
about
was,
research being a bad word, that's something I've even experienced within universities, that research is a bad word. So if you want to find out how depressed someone is and why are they depressed, what is happening, even there the research is a bad word. Therefore, if you're not helping a person, if you're collecting data from the person, well, there is a future where certain people will be helped. But even that is like, a bad word. So I think though we have come a long way from there, things are changing. I have a sort of a small question for everyone. Uh, One thing that I have realized is there is a lot of market research. In a sense, what I mean is private research. So we have a lot of corporate institutions from outside India who want data, but they can't go through universities, so they just collect it within the community, right? So is that, I mean, how much of that is contributing to this kind of an attitude is something perhaps we should also question. Because when you go to someone with a questionnaire, they say, oh, we've answered hundreds of these, right? And then, oh, that person gave us money for answering this. Those kind of things. Now, some way, maybe we need some kind of an oversight in order to do impactful, large-scale research. If these small things are actually eating into the, what do you call it, participant base, that is something we need to be concerned about at this point. That's one thing I feel, but I don't know what others think, because I'm coming from, I'm a closet academic. So
I think we need to differentiate ourselves. This is precisely what I got mistaken for. That I was doing some kind of market research for something. So differentiation and being aware that there's this behavioral, experimental psychology, neuroscience, decision-making research that is basically academic research and different from market research. So to answer, just to sort of address Joe's point a little bit. Ritwik, I and Anujit have started this behavioral research in economics workshop where we annually do put people's tails on fire. At least we try. And so hopefully more of these, will come into being sort of. So this is a, India-wide conference. In fact, people from outside who work in India are also invited. And so we, spend a lot of time reading people's papers, and hopefully people get good comments from each other. Just that's one initiative that we have, but we need more. That's for sure.
Totally agree. That was really interesting, that part of the discussion. So the next topic that I want to talk about, probably will end with that, is that so a while ago I was talking to this startup founder in India, and he wanted to create this marketing team. So he said he's going to hire a bunch of MBAs to take care of the marketing team. And I was sort of like telling him that, you probably also need to put in some behavioral scientists in there because they're really good at it. And it took me a while to convince him. And he finally hired one behavioral scientist and 4 MBAs there. And the main reason I feel why behavioral science is not the mainstream, by mainstream I mean having a master's in behavioral economics, like how you can get one abroad but not in India, is that there's always this demand pull that you need to get an employment, and only then students would join that course, right? And do you think there is still an issue there? Like, do you think there's a problem with employment at the moment for a behavioral scientist, and how do you think we can address this issue? Because that's the only way we can bring it to the real mainstream at universities, right? So yeah, let's start with Sujoy this time.
Okay. I think there's one issue is in India collecting data, and this is addendum to the points that that's already come up, is that I think people are also collecting data is generally very challenging in India, because we live in, I think India is, I believe, an autonomous, areas strung together. And I think people have very strong norms, So it's, you go to America and you go to some Ohio town, and you ask people are like, okay, fine. You explain them the instructions. They're like, fine. And can you be truthful with your instructions? Like people like Kahneman and people say, why should people lie about stuff, Because, what's the incentive to lie? Why do you need to pay them also? If they're thinking that, that's what they'll say, right? If they truly loss averse, they will show these responses to these lotteries. Why do you need to also compensate them? So there was this, but the thing is, in India, it's not so clear, I mean, I've run cross-cultural studies where participation rate of Italian guys is like 200 on 200. Like we sent 200 surveys completed within a week. In India, it's like 90 surveys. I'm emailing them like 50 times. Please, guys, fill it out. They're not completing it. And I think all of this feeds back. And we are not a data-centric society, I believe. And that's why, to a large extent, even though I'm working with some people in the private, people like Bias and people, some people who I know who are doing these projects and pretty well. I think there's also Final Mile in Bombay. But I think overall, this kind of collected data from people is not seen by the corporate world to be particularly serious. It's like, अरे वो लगा दो कुछ group फूप ले आओ और कुछ interview कर दो और वो interview से कुछ आएगा, top line दे दो, वो top line लिख देंगे हम लोग, so and it's not their, in a way, it is their fault. They could do something for it. And I would urge all corporate people listening in, please, do something about it. There's a whole world out there, and we can all do really well doing this kind of research, confronted with global warming, climate change, our cities falling into ruin, public policy in shambles, health policy. We can do a whole lot of stuff, actually, if we study people's behavior. So anybody's listening in, please, we can help you and you can help us, So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that I think people are doing it, but there's a natural resistance. So when the data is not thought of to be seriously, people are, we have a construct in Bengal called the Gach Tola survey. What is a Gach? Gach means tree and Tola means under the tree. For the Bengali people who didn't understand, is you come as an enumerator to a village and you just go to the tree in the middle of the village next to the temple and you ask people, what is the SC/ST composition? What is the thing? How many kids go to school? All that. And they'll give you some average. Okay, they'll give you some statistic, which is some central tendency statistics. You may even be able to understand the variability a little bit with what these guys say. And then all you do is go back to your Excel spreadsheet and you create data where with these means and that kind of variability. It's completely fake. It's completely wrong. But and this is what enumerators talk about all the time in Indian context, because nobody's taking it seriously. What comes out of the data is some top line stuff. People just want that PowerPoint there. The people who are supplying the data also know that either data wala hai, fill up karne ka zarurat hi nahi hai. I mean, Junofy is doing her PhD and all this stuff about getting agents to fill in your forms. I mean, we are not good at filling up forms and stuff. We are good at agents coming and telling us idhar sign kar do, udhar sign kar do, and they're using some default. This is how we supply data. So yeah, there's a general equilibrium problem. It's not a partial equilibrium problem. It's not a problem on one side. Researchers are bad, but the industry is dying for this stuff. But there's some disconnect between it. No, it's the whole system is kind of systemically problematic. So data is not considered serious. There are, then some rubbish techniques are used to collect some data. Which is bad data. And over time, people are like, why do we need you guys? Because, you're giving us this data. So it's like a low-level equilibrium trap, to use phrases like we learned in economics in my residency college days. So I'm
learning a lot.
So, okay, that's what I had to say. I mean, I don't want to overplay it, but that's the reason. And I want to tell people that, open your minds to this. And there's a whole lot of research. People like Ritwik and, Jeevant and the rest of us, there's 7 or 8 of 10 of us doing, active research there. We can go much beyond what we go. If we got a little funding, a little bit of, an environment which kind of supported all of this. I mean, I've been asked by an IRB chairperson once that if my prisoner's dilemma experiment was going to be played with prisoners. So I said, No, it's not played with prisoners. It's just called the prisoner's dilemma because a cute story around it these guys at Rand had constructed in the early 50s was about prisoners. But it does nothing to do with, like in my case, with prisoners. And he was shocked and he was like, oh, okay, I know. Okay, fine. Don't argue it. I get it. Like, but as Madhavi is saying that, a lot of IRB people are used to dealing with maybe your type of experiments, animal experiments, that they're completely okay. But whenever it comes with human beings, they're like, what's the purpose of this? Like, that's what I get told. I mean, over time, I've eked out a kind of aggressive front so that, the people don't argue so much with me in the meeting, but it's not been easy. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Ritwik, do you want to continue?
Yeah, very quickly, coming back to the question that you asked, two issues come to my mind. One, there is a charm of behavioral science, behavioral economics, psychology. There is a certain, it appeals to a certain kind of intuition among us, which is what gets us really excited. Now, since behavioral science, behavioral economics, psychology, and the kind of follies that we demonstrate people have, since they appeal to the intuition, people tend to think that you don't need to be necessarily a specialist in order to comment on these things, right?
Yes.
As
Very
a
well
result,
put.
this kind of explains the issue that you had where the company did not want to hire a behavioral scientist, but were fine with the jack of all trades, the MBAs, right? MBAs are jack of all trades, and I'm forbidden to say the second part of the sentence that usually goes with it. But so that's the reason it appeals to the intuition, and people think I don't need to be a specialist to comment on it. So that's the charm of behavioral economics, and that's also the Achilles heel of the subject. So we should be very wary of non-specialists nudging people from left to right and top to bottom.
Yes.
So that's the first point I wanted to make regarding this. Regarding the second, the second issue I wanted to point out was, should we start a program in behavioral science in India at the moment? I don't think so. So I think, there are a couple of top PhD programs in behavioral economics. So for example, Carnegie Mellon University has a PhD in behavioral economics program. And there are people like George Lowenstein, Linda Babcock sitting in CMU, right? So the research scene in India is still not that thick to be able to sustain a master's program in behavioral economics or behavioral science, right? I don't even know if there is a very good bachelor's and master's program in psychology. So I think we should. I'm not aware of it.
No, there are, but it's not this experimental stuff. It's other stuff.
Yes. We do offer a behavioral science master's program in a sort of an American mode. I will explain a little more later.
There's something
in
IIT. There's something in IIT Gandhinagar as well.
Right. So things are starting, but if I was asked, I wouldn't say you necessarily need a dedicated program for behavioral science, because academia in India is still not that thick. I would rather say we should strengthen electives in the form of behavioral economics, in the form of psychology, in the form of psychology and marketing, social psychology, as Madhavi pointed out. So we should bring all of those as electives within standard programs, which tend to attract the brightest students. I mean, we can start a program in bachelor's and master's in behavioral science, all right, but will it attract the best students is the question. Take a field which is like, let's say, sociology or economics, which does attract a lot of people, a lot of good students, and encourage a lot of electives in and around behavioral science.
I'd like to add on to what Ritwik was saying. This is a fairly new program, probably running for about 3 or 4 years, I think. It is slowly developing at Christ University. This is something we offer people who are working. and it's a master's in behavioral science. And we find there's a lot of demand, and those who come are very interested. Although we need to develop that program, somehow it works like some kind of an add-on and to what they have. So we get engineers, computer science people, also those who have worked in marketing, who come to take this particular course so that they understand some aspects of psychology. Some of them have worked in certain areas, maybe work with nudging or something like that, and they feel like they need something stronger, right? So something like that, if we offer as an add-on program, we found that it has a good sort of, I don't know, a lot of people seem to like it. But to shape this program, to give something definite, so is something that probably we need to start doing now. If this is the area that is required, and if it is required in the context of economics, then the set of courses would probably be different. Let's say someone who's more interested in HR, let's say, right? So they want to know more of the counseling, those kind of topics perhaps. So in that sense, the behavioral science program is been set up in Christ, and this is the sort of an audience or rather participants we are trying to attract. So I just thought I'll put it out there. So we saw it as a solution. This was something that was brought in as a solution because we have an HR program, and then we have students from our management school and other sort of, maybe even engineering, who want to sometimes do a thesis or a project with psychological sort of, underpinnings, like something about behavior, something using questionnaires. So all these sort of have prompted us to probably look at that this is a space where clearly we need courses which give you some background, give you skills so that you can translate it. But I think it's still the early stages. It needs to develop. Sorry, Sujoy was saying something.
No, I just, sorry, go on. I think.
No, that's it.
So, in fact, I hate to be the eternal optimist on this panel, but, again, things are moving. I can see things moving in a very nice direction. So I have myself conducted several, sessions for corporates where they've been exposed to behavioral economics principles, and I have showed that it's not just social policy and, abstract things that we have applications. There are applications for pricing of their products. There are applications for what variants they offer, menus they offer, and so on. And so more and more companies are finding this, executives are finding this very useful in terms of that they need this kind of thinking. And on the other side, we are also building a national stock exchange center for behavioral sciences. So look at the name itself tells you that it's National Stock Exchange Center for Behavioral Sciences. So it's a very deep connect with and precisely what Madhavi, what you were saying, that this comprises of faculty who are in the HR area, who are in the organizational behavior area, marketing area, and economics area, and finance area, who are all pursuing their own subjects with a behavioral sort of look at their own subject. And so more and more such electives are being offered in IIM Ahmedabad. My own elective is heavily subscribed, and it's going very well. They do very nice projects, some of which become research projects that I work on. I fund from my own pocket to sort of try and get them published. I think Ritwik's approach is fantastic. You start with good electives in these programs. Eventually, these guys then go out and become executives, come back and say, oh, well, this intervention in this sort of setting was very useful. This sort of concept that I learned, level K thinking, is useful here in this sort of scenario. And so it develops. It will take time, though. It will take time. Although one thing I want to say is that one thing I've been bothered about by a little bit is precisely what Ritwik just said, that these nudgers who are coming without any training is very, very scary. For example, even in the economic survey, which had the article on, we had a chapter on behavioral economics, there was a figure that showed that Aadhaar is a nudge. It's from it's government's own chapter saying that Aadhaar is a nudge. I literally talked to IPS officers who think lathi charge is a nudge. It's just a nudge with a lathi. So
Yeah.
I mean because it's precisely because it's so easy to understand. Like once you at least when it's easy to think you understand. And so this space is quickly getting filled up. The space of consulting corporates and this policymakers is getting filled up by these sort of amateur players who have not sort of done rigorous training, but just gone into consulting straight away. I think so. Academics also need to make an effort to connect the fast pace of growth of corporates, and there is a demand. There's a huge demand. It's just that are we smart enough to become the supply, or are we going to be sort of marketed out of the game by our very own MBAs or something like that?
Yes, I think I agree with you. You're very right. I think the notion of behavioral science as a specialization needs to be ensconced very strongly. So then those who look for employees with those skills will pick from that particular pool. So there has to be some sort of a super specialization tag or something like that for that, so that you actually have a group of people who are completely thrilled by these kind of topics can actually do work in that area.
Yeah. In some sense, Taylor's book was so accessible that it became a little bit of a. Everybody thought it's super simple, and it's everything is a nudge. So that's something we have to guard against and maybe write against in columns or put it out there that look, Aadhaar is not a nudge, and taxing people is not a nudge, and just so many bad examples of people being misusing these concepts. It's very easy to misuse.
Yes, in the West, typically you have like, for example, I've been associated with this concept of impulsivity, which was a sort of a new construct that arose in trying to understand risk-taking behavior. Now, the first thing that happened, I mean, there was a lot of people talking about it, it's of course grown out of something that was already there. But what happened was there is an International Society of Impulsivity Research or something like that. And then slowly sort of, that those kind of group formations started happening along with that society. And now it has its own sort of, its space within the different domains. So something like that we need for India, where you have that, where which sort of frames something clearly enough for those who are the consumers of that particular domain of knowledge.
Right.
I think that is the mismatch we have to fill.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we need to move on to the question and answers from the audience now. But before we do that, I just want to highlight one thing that Jeevant said. So behavioral science courses, when offered as electives, are extremely demanded, and we all would agree to that because it's just super fun and everybody absolutely loves it. And I also see that in my department, like anyone who speaks English always signs up for the course. So it's just really fun, and everyone absolutely loves it, and there's no doubt in that. Cool. So moving on to the questions, you can feel free to take the questions which are general. So the question I'm going to ask now is a general question for everyone. What are your views on qualitative research in behavioral economics? I guess because we spoke a lot about experiments and field experiments, I guess someone asked that question. Does anyone want to take it?
Very important. I mean, to get a first sense of, you can't just, you can jump into quantitative straight away, but it's sometimes important to first get a sense of the broad picture, and qualitative research can be extremely helpful there. And there are many questions that cannot always be answered by quantitative methods. So why should you constrain yourself to a point? The point is to answer a question. If it demands a qualitative answer, give a qualitative answer. So I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't quite agree with Jeevant on that. But I'm not sure from what perspective the question came. But if the question came from the perspective of publishing research, absolutely no. It is very, very hard to publish qualitative behavioral science research. Almost all of the stuff that gets published, all of the stuff that gets published in economics is quantitative in nature. My strong prior is the stuff that gets published in psychology is also quantitative in nature. In fact, the number of qualitative journals are shrinking. So if you want to approach the subject from the research point of view, it may not be at the end of the day. You have to get a job, you have to get published, you have to get tenure. So may not be a very good idea.
But you can go into sociology department or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think
You can go into, I agree. In economics, psychology, it will be bleak, but there are other departments.
Yeah.
So
OB is very, my sense at least is organizational behavior is very quant. Marketing today is increasingly getting very quant. ASR, American Sociological Review, is looking very quant these days. I think we are moving to a quant equilibrium. So that's one. The second, more important, the reason why I think there's a, I find it difficult to kind of grasp the qualitative findings in any subject is the issue of external validity. External validity is a stick which is routinely used to beat up the lab experimenters, right? So if it can be used to beat up lab experimenters, imagine the kind of danda that you will get if you end up doing qualitative research on behavioral economics.
Yeah, I think you have a very valid point. I think there's also sometimes like a nice sweet spot where your research is quantitative, but you sort of back it by some qualitative stuff as well. Then it gets a little more of context, but it's also publishable.
So
I've seen very bad examples of quantitative that had no idea about the mechanism of why X affects
can I
Y.
say something about that?
I've seen a lot of that research with extremely complicated econometric, this identification, that. But when you ask the guy, what was happening, why was this happening, they have no idea.
So I'm not talking about good and bad research. So I'm talking about the best quantitative research and the best qualitative research. That's what I'm comparing.
Okay.
So can I tell you that some of my colleagues would reserve the biggest danda for Ritwik actually, because for saying that colleagues in anthro, colleagues who study phenomenology, ethnology, all of them would come at him. I'll give him the address in Bangalore so they can come with their dandas. Women's studies. I want to.
Absolutely.
So, no. I mean, to be a little more serious, I think they answer different questions. So, I mean, I get the point about. I'm also, my partner is a qualitative researcher, so I know a little better about these things. I see her working on stuff, and I think these are asking very different questions, and they are not attempting to be representative. They are attempting to track processes. So it's enough for an ethnologist who publishes in the American Ethnologist or in cultural anthropology journals to go and talk to 15 households and live with them for 3 months and get this gets published in top anthropology journals. So these get tenure at Yale and Harvard and all that. So there's still a qualitative participant observer scene, but no, it's not answering the question that what proportion of the population shows this trait or adheres to that norm. This is not going to answer. But given that we know this norm exists, how does it play out in the day-to-day functioning? That would be something an anthropologist would be looking at, and that would be, as Junofy is saying, sort of complementing the approach to this other approach, and we know very well this experimental approach has come under a lot of attack, especially after Abhijit and Esther have won their Nobel. It's like, okay, so what is representative? Stuff is showing up significant at at 100 it's not significant, but when you increase the sample size to 1,000 becomes significant. But then when you increase the sample to 1 million, then about 50 other variables are going to be significant. So, I mean, where do you stop? And I know that's a bad question. It's a straw man type. I mean, you can use that to knock danda, give danda to anybody. But I think these are also somewhat valid, because I think a lot of economists, including me, I think I shouldn't try to be so holier than thou, would be like, oh, what's the sample size? Oh my God, only 300. Oh, come on, you need to get 4,000. But some guy will say 4,000. what's it measuring in a country like India, where everything changes in a few kilometers? We are bound by these small, tight norms, which are like, people believe they're in the country of their mohalla, not like, you know, in their, seriously, it's coming out in all this IHDS stuff I'm doing on a paper, is that all these, their primary sampling unit is very, very predictive of things, you know, which is a certain set of neighborhoods, which district, state, and locality, which covers. They're showing huge differences in behavior. So, you know what I'm saying? So what's representative? Like, I agree that 1,000 is more than 100, and 2,000 is more than 1,000, and 1 lakh is more than. But where do you stop there? There's a big debate on this with Angus Deaton and Abhijit Banerjee, which is kind of entertaining. And it's on YouTube. And I think about this whole idea of what is representativeness and things like that. Anyway, that's all.
To sort of summarize, I guess it sort of depends on what questions you're answering and
totally
what field you're in, right? So, okay, so let's take another question. Why is the academia and practice world so disjoint, given the business world can test and learn at much faster rate? And how do we align the incentives? Maybe the IM folks might want to take this.
It's not as disjointed. They're coming close all the time. See, again, when there was, look, Sujoy and Madhavi and these folks really somehow made their way started this field, and there were others, and then it took time to get faculty here. It is taking time, I agree, but it's happening slowly. And I do think that there's need for recognition both from the business side and from academic side, that there's a counterpart on the other side. And yeah, sure, we need to reach out. I agree absolutely that a lot of research questions can come from business problems that business managers face. And a lot of solutions exist for problems already in academia that they're just not aware of. And but slowly and surely we'll get there. So we're trying. We are actively trying here.
Do you think there's some nicer way to bridge this gap? Because like clearly the business world is not really interested in reading all these complicated theoretical derivations and all.
No, so when we do sessions with them, then it has to be so. It is very challenging for academics as well to boil down all that you have learned into a very easy to swallow pill for the corporates. It's a skill that I am learning all the time by teaching them and interacting with them. In fact, to be honest, to prepare, say, one lecture of 1.5 hours, I have to read for 3 days, because they don't care about the method and the the empirical technique and so on. They care about the main result and intuitively what was your method. And so it takes a lot of reading on my part to give them something that's valuable for them. And so it is an effort, absolutely. And in both directions, for them, even however much I simplify, it remains complicated for them. Yeah. So it's an effort that's required in both directions. But it is a certain skill that academics need to develop, and I think it takes practice to develop it. It takes a lot of practice, and on both sides to get.
Even at the university levels, I think it is one of the criteria on which the universities get evaluated in some way. So there has been a push towards increasing industry collaboration. So at least preparing forums for something like that, where this, I think any university worth its salt which wants to seriously improve its ranking and things like that is actually working towards that. So there would be a lot changing, and I think it would be exponential. After a point, it's just going to shoot up. So I think effort is certainly ongoing from the university perspective also.
Yeah, I think such incentives are like really helpful in this way, right?
I think academics also need to get rid of disdain for the corporates and so on. I think that attitude change also needs to come. That this is some corporate whatever. This is not high level research. You need to talk to businesses and
Very, very. It's an age thing, though. It's a legacy thing. I think Indian entrepreneurs today are much more nimble on their feet. And I think the entrepreneurs that you dealt with 20, 30 years ago, that kind of, were much more legacy entrepreneurs. They didn't really care about what can we do to get that strategic advantage to move there. It was more like, how do we get our business going from day to day? There, I think, insights from behavioral economics, except to help you a little bit in your HR management and a little bit in your, it doesn't really, help there. But I feel today, talking to some people, in the industry, I think things have gotten a lot better. And I think with our data capabilities becoming higher, it's not like, as Ritwik started out with doing field experiments and stuff, these have a lot of value, I think, to even the industry. I mean, whatever we academics may think about it, and some people may have snobberies about, working with that. And I mean, we should get beyond that, I believe, as academics. And I feel that, I think conducting field experiments well and all that is greatly an advantage of academic study, especially given that marketers and corporates are interested in local heterogeneity. So a lot of them are obsessed about one thing that we average out in economics. We try to at least, let's control for all of that and look at how this variable acts. They, I've seen, are more concerned about local markets and how they're interacting. So local kind of neighborhood variables interacting with demographic and household level, they are very, very interested in that, because that's what they want to exploit in a way to promote things. So I think there, the idea of field experiments and different contexts and all that, there's a huge synergy to be realized in that, actually. And
I'm gonna stop that discussion there, because there's one other interesting question which I think is really useful, and then we'll quickly wrap up. Let's just take a minute to quickly answer that question. So this is from a student of psychology, and she's asking, she's interested in working in the space of behavioral science. Any advice on how to get into this seemingly fledgling space with limited opportunities in India? Do you think that that's sort of true, that there's limiting opportunities? And if that's the case, what is the answer? Because you're all academics, and I'm pretty sure a lot of students here have the questions. Maybe just a quick 2-minute round, and then we'll wrap up. Jeevant, do you want to answer?
I mean, there are some dedicated programs that I know of IIT Gandhinagar. I know several other IITs have dedicated programs. So that's one approach. Another approach is you enter a mainstream economics or other decision science program, and then you take a lot of the electives. So I think those are the two major approaches that you can follow, as far as I understand it. I think that would be my answer. And you look at the faculty pages of the possible institutions, and you see look at their interests and see if you find a lot of 3 or 4 that you prospectively can work with, then apply there and get in somehow, and then just work with them.
Yeah, I would also say the same thing in the context of psychology. You would, to find professors who are beginning to work in these areas. And it's not important that you get a degree in behavioral science, but if you're following up some research or look at research projects and become part of those research projects, that would also give you a level of specialization.
I mean, I can say
documented.
I can say that for JNU, we have 3 econ departments. One is econ geography, one is international, and one is our econ department. And we have enough people interested in behavior. So if people really want to get into a master's program and take that forward, they will run into one of us there who's interested enough to. So that's the best we can do right now. I mean, the other option is to go abroad to Berkeley or a London school and do that program, but it's usually costly and above the reach of a lot of, middle class, even upper middle class people. So,
You move to Germany or Switzerland, where you have free education, and the education system is quite amazing, guys.
Or Denmark, I think, where
true. Thank you so much, everyone in the panel. It's been an amazing discussion. I had a lot of fun, and I hope the audience also had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Prakash.
Junofy, thank you so much for conducting this amazing panel. We just found out. Happy birthday! And it's formally we are supposed to give you a gift because it's your birthday, and you gave us this wonderful gift. Thank you so much.
This is what I love doing, so I had fun.
Happy birthday, Junofy.
Thank you, guys.
Dr. Madhavi, Professor Sujoy, Professor Ritwik, and Professor Jeevant. Amazing panel. We actually have double the number of questions still pending compared to what we shared. People have been loving it across YouTube, Facebook, on the website, and on LinkedIn. And maybe we'll compile them all and send it down your way, or ask them to be in touch with you. We'll share your LinkedIn profiles whenever you have time. Possibly you could engage them with your answers. A good amount of your discussion touches heart, because the whole discussion about the need for the structured program and the over reliance on MBA at some point of time, right? A couple of years back, when I wanted to pursue a line around career around this line, I actually ended up doing an MBA from IIMB. And there are some programs, like you talk about, there are programs around STDM, strategic thinking and decision making here and there. One class maybe on behavioral economics in the marketing side, or in a economics class. But it would be lovely to have a fantastic program the way you guys have talked about. And thank you so much. Hopefully 10 years from now, when you look back, and we say, okay, this was the group. These were the people who kind of spurred that education out here, all of you. All the best for that. Thank you very much. Junofy, happy birthday again. Stay safe.
Okay, Junofy.